It started with a single pebble, left on a porch in a quiet town by a stray canine no one could explain. Every morning he returned, bringing something small, something forgotten. But what began as a strange routine soon unraveled into a decades-old mystery buried deep in the woods beneath silence and sealed with secrets only this dog seemed to remember. Who was he? And why did he know where the missing had gone? If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? Now, let's jump into the story. Nolan Briggs wasn't a man who liked surprises. At 67, after decades as a mail carrier in the quiet town of Alder Pines, he'd grown to appreciate the predictable. His days were slow, his mornings slower. He woke up at 6:30 sharp, poured exactly 1.5 cups of coffee, and sat on the front porch with his newspaper, whether it was rain, snow, or sunshine. So when he opened the front door one morning and found a smooth, round pebble placed carefully on his doormat, he frowned. Must have kicked off someone's shoe, he mumbled, nudging it aside with his slipper. But the next morning there was another one. This time it was perfectly placed right in the center of the mat. It looked deliberate. Too deliberate. Nolan squinted into the early fog, peering up and down his street. Nothing. No kids laughing, no prankster teens, no wind-blown signs, just silence and dew on the grass. He picked up the pebble, turned it over in his hand. It was pale gray with a single blue stripe through the middle. Kinda pretty, actually. He set it on his porch railing and forgot about it. Until the third morning. 3 pebbles this time, all arranged in a straight line like a message, like someone or something was trying to get his attention. And that's when Nolan saw the dog. It was sitting at the edge of his lawn, just far enough to be cautious, close enough to be noticed. A medium-sized canine, with a patchy tan coat and ears that stood up like antennas. The dog didn't move, it didn't bark, it just watched him. "Hey," Nolan called, holding up the newest pebble. "You doing this?" The dog blinked slowly, then turned and disappeared behind the neighbor's hedge. Now Nolan had seen his fair share of strange things while walking mail routes over the years. Escaped goats, kids pretending to be mailboxes, one man who swore his cat could predict the weather. But this? A dog delivering stones? He couldn't let it go. The next day, Nolan got up early, earlier than usual. He even skipped his second cup of coffee. Sure enough, just before sunrise, there came a light scratching sound at the door. He peered out the window. There it was, the dog, placing yet another stone on the mat. He opened the door slowly. The dog didn't run. It stepped back, tail low but wagging just a little. It stared at him with those deep searching eyes, then turned and started walking away. It paused after a few steps, looked back. "You want me to follow, huh?" Nolan said, grabbing his jacket. He didn't know why he was doing this. He wasn't the kind of guy to chase after mystery. But something about the dog felt important. Like it wasn't just delivering stones. It was delivering a message. They walked 3 blocks in silence. Past the bakery that still smelled like cinnamon even after closing, past the school with the squeaky swing, and finally to a narrow path behind the abandoned bus stop. The dog paused at the edge of the woods. "Don't tell me you're going in there," Nolan muttered. The K9 stepped into the trees, and Nolan followed. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were their footsteps crunching over fallen leaves and the occasional flutter of wings. The trail was faint, but the dog knew it well, weaving between trees like it had walked it 100 times. After 10 minutes, they came to a small clearing. At its center was a weathered wooden bench, half buried in moss and fallen needles. The dog padded up to it, sat down, and waited. Nolan approached slowly. Something about the place gave him goosebumps. The dog let out a low whine and pawed at the dirt beneath the bench. "You want me to?" Nolan knelt, brushing aside the leaves. Beneath the dirt was a small shoe. A child's shoe. Pink, worn out, and covered in grime. Next to it was a faded photo. A little girl standing next to a tree smiling. Nolan's hands trembled. "What is this?" he whispered. The canine didn't answer. It just sat there, quiet and still, eyes on the photo like it had been waiting for Nolan to find it. He took out his phone, hands still shaking, and called the sheriff's office. When the deputy arrived, Nolan explained everything. Well, not everything. He left out the Pebbles. Who would believe that? Back home that night, Nolan couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, the 3 Pebbles still on the railing beside him. At some point, the dog returned, curled up under the stairs, and didn't leave. "You're not just a stray, are you?" Nolan whispered. In the morning, there was another Pebble on the mat, and so, the trail began. The next few mornings were the same. Nolan would wake before sunrise, open his front door and find another Pebble, carefully placed, always smooth and never exactly like the last. Gray, red, even one that sparkled faintly under the porch light. Each time the canine dog was nearby, waiting. The town had started to whisper. Folks in Alder Pines didn't miss much, and when word got around that Nolan Briggs, the most predictable man in town, had started taking long morning walks into the woods with a stray dog, eyebrows were raised. Nolan didn't care. After what Trail had shown him, and yes, he had started calling the dog Trail, he couldn't stop now. That pink child's shoe, the photo, they weren't random. They meant something. Someone had been lost, and Trail had remembered. He wasn't alone for long. One morning at the post office, a curious voice called out as Nolan was picking up some supplies. "Mr. Briggs?" He turned to see Lila Marsh, the town's librarian, holding a clipboard and a coffee. "I heard about the, dog," she said with a nervous smile. "And the photo you found. That girl, her name was Emma Ralston. She vanished in 1984. I looked it up." Nolan blinked. "You did?" Lila nodded. "There's more. Dozens of names, all cold cases. Some never even reported in the papers, but I found the sheriff's logs. Missing kids, lost hikers, people who just disappeared." Nolan stared at her for a moment. Then he told her everything. About Trail, the Pebbles, the walks, the feeling in his gut that the dog wasn't just wandering, he was leading. "I want to help," Lila said simply. So she did. That week, they followed Trail to 3 more locations. The first was an overgrown picnic ground behind the old train station. Trail pawed at the earth beneath a collapsed table. They found a rusty toy car, crushed but still blue. The second was a narrow ditch near Sycamore Hill. Trail dug with slow, steady motion. Beneath the mud was a gold chain, the kind a teenager might have worn in the 70s. The third was at the edge of Miller's Pond, a drained lake now full of reeds and broken beer bottles. Trail sniffed along the bank until he found what he wanted. He barked once, then stepped back. Nolan knelt down and uncovered a scrap of fabric, old, sun-bleached, and clearly part of a child's dress. Lila logged each find, writing dates and locations in a notebook. She took photos, even started building a map. "It's like a trail of breadcrumbs," she said one day. "Only sad ones." At first, Sheriff Cal Drummond didn't want to hear any of it. "You're saying a dog is solving cases my department shelved 30 years ago?" he asked, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "No," Nolan replied calmly. "I'm saying your department never finished the trail. This dog's still walking it." Drummond was a man who didn't like being told he missed something, especially by a retired mailman and a librarian. But curiosity won out and he agreed to visit one of the sites. They took him to the picnic ground. When Drummond saw the toy car, the look in his eyes changed. "This was in the file," he muttered. "The kid, Devin Marks, he carried a blue car everywhere, went missing in '89. We searched this whole park." "Not deep enough," Nolan said quietly. That night, Trail didn't bring a pebble. Instead, he laid a piece of paper at the door. Torn, yellowed, barely legible, but there was a name scribbled at the bottom. Toby. Lila traced it back to a missing 5-year-old from 1961, last seen near the quarry. They thought he fell, she said, but they never found anything. Trail led them there the next morning. The quarry was silent. Cold wind whipped through the rocks. Trail didn't hesitate. He walked straight to a crumbling wall and began pawing at the gravel. Nolan helped dig. They uncovered a leather shoe, torn at the heel. By then, the town wasn't whispering anymore. People started leaving candles at Nolan's porch. Others began, sharing old stories, things they remembered from childhood, little details they never told anyone. The canine was no longer just a mystery. He was a guide, a keeper of forgotten voices. Lila gave Trail a nickname in her notes. The Archivist. Nolan didn't mean to become the town's keeper of forgotten names, but that's exactly what he was becoming. It started with Pebbles, then lost items, and now people were showing up at his porch with memories. I don't know if this means anything, a woman said one morning, placing an old photograph in his hands. But my sister vanished in 1974. She used to wear a locket just like the one you found. Another man came 2 days later with a shoebox of childhood things. We had a dog that looked just like your K9. He disappeared the same week my cousin did. We always thought he ran away. Trail sat quietly through it all. He didn't bark. He didn't wag. He just watched. And each morning a new pebble waited on Nolan's doormat. Always smooth, always deliberate, as if marking time. One Tuesday morning, Trail brought something different. Not a stone, not a ribbon. This time, it was a notebook. Worn, water-stained, held together with a strip of twine. Nolan opened it carefully. Inside were names. Dozens of them. First names, initials, rough sketches of locations. Alongside each entry was a date, and sometimes a simple word. Found, missing, remembered. What is this? Nolan asked aloud. Trail stood beside him, tail still, eyes focused. Lila came over that afternoon and flipped through the pages with him. It's a ledger, she whispered. But not one from this year, or even this decade. Some of the names matched the clues Trail had already led them to. Others were unknown, and some were chillingly specific. Listen to this, she said. June 3rd, 1965, EB. Found behind old canning plant, no response. That matches the date we found the shoe last week. It's not a coincidence, Nolan said. He's keeping track. Who wrote this? Lila asked. Nolan looked at Trail. The next morning, Trail led them west, out past the dairy farm and into a forgotten stretch of woods behind an old orchard. The trees grew close together, their trunks leaning like tired shoulders. After nearly an hour, they reached a rotted wooden structure. The roof had caved in, but parts of the frame still stood. A rusted sign on the front read, Barnes Creek Boys Camp. Trail paused, then stepped inside. Beneath a broken bunk, Nolan found a small metal tin. Inside, a child's drawing and a marble. The drawing was of a boy and a dog standing by a creek, stick figures smiling beneath a crooked sun. The name Denny was written in block letters. Another one, Nolan said quietly. Lila recorded it, adding it to their growing map. Later that day, a man knocked on Nolan's door. He was tall, in his late 70s, wearing a thick coat and a faded baseball cap. My name's Eddie Landon, he said. I think I knew your dog. Nolan raised an eyebrow. You knew Trail? Eddie chuckled. Back then, he wasn't called that. We called him Skipper. He looked just like this. He used to wander around town when I was a kid. Smartest dog I ever saw. Led me out of the woods once when I got lost after dark. That was how long ago? Eddie scratched his beard. 1958, I think. But that can't be the same dog. He paused. Can it? Nolan didn't answer. Neither did Trail. Instead, the dog padded over and sat beside Eddie's boot. Eddie stared down at him, blinking. Well, I'll be... The next clue came the following morning. A child's plastic sheriff badge, faded gold with a bent pin. Trail dropped it gently on the mat and walked toward the edge of town. Nolan and Lila followed him to an overgrown lot near the grain silos. There, hidden under a rusted wheelbarrow, was a bundle of small bones, animal bones mostly, but among them a piece of blue fabric, torn and faded. "I've seen this," Lila said, "in a photo from the Curtis family. Their daughter, Lisa. She went missing in 1989, always wore a blue ribbon in her hair." Nolan called Sheriff Drummond, who now came without hesitation. He logged the find, nodded to Trail, and said only, "We'll test everything." That night, Nolan sat on the clinic floor, Trail resting beside him. The ledger, now protected in plastic sleeves, lay open on the table. They had started calling it the Book of the Lost. "I think you've been carrying this for all of us," Nolan whispered. "Too many years. Too many memories." Trail didn't move. But the next morning, he brought another item, a rusted key with no tag. Nolan looked at it, then looked at Trail. "You're not done, are you?" he said. Trail turned toward the road, tail low, eyes steady, and just like that, the journey continued. The morning Trail brought the key. Something felt different. It wasn't just another pebble or ribbon, not a child's toy or a scrap of paper. This was heavy, rusted, and ancient-looking. Nolan held it in his palm and stared at it for a long time. There was no tag, no clue about what it opened. But when he looked up, Trail was already walking down the gravel path, tail low, steps slow but certain. "I guess we're not done," Nolan muttered, grabbing his coat. Lila joined them as they reached the edge of town. She didn't ask questions anymore. She just walked beside Nolan, eyes on Trail, notebook in hand. They passed the church, the old grain silos, and a boarded-up schoolhouse. Trail led them beyond all of it, into thick woods that grew darker with each step. The air smelled like pine, needles, and damp earth. The trail narrowed, then opened suddenly to reveal a place Nolan had never seen before. A stone cabin sat tucked into the hillside, hidden behind layers of moss and ivy. Its roof sagged in the middle. The windows were dusty. A wooden door stood at the front, its lock rusted and untouched for what looked like decades. Nolan stepped forward and held up the key. It slid into the lock with a heavy click. Inside, the cabin was still. Dust danced in the light that streamed through the broken roof. Everything was quiet except for the soft scratch of Trail's paws on the wooden floor. On a small table in the center of the room was a shoebox. Nolan approached slowly. Lila stood behind him, silent. Inside the box were items, dozens of them. Buttons, pins, scraps of ribbon, marbles, matchbox cars, and a folded letter. Nolan's breath caught in his chest. Each item had a date and initials written in careful handwriting. Some matched what Trail had already uncovered. Others were names they'd never seen before. Beneath them all was one final note. "He walked where we didn't. He remembered what we forgot." Lila sat down on the edge of a broken chair and whispered, "This wasn't just a trail, it was a memory." They left the cabin quietly. That night, Trail didn't move from his spot near the porch. He didn't eat, he didn't drink. He just watched the sky. Nolan sat beside him, gently brushing a hand through his fur. "You've done everything you could," he whispered. "You've brought them home." The next morning, there was no pebble at the door. Instead, there was a collar, old leather cracked from time and weather. A small tag dangled from it. The letters were faint but readable. "To Rusty, my best friend." Nolan sat on the steps and held it in both hands. Trail was nowhere in sight. He called for Lila and waited. They checked the road, the woods, the clinic yard. Finally, they found him lying near the garden behind the building. His breathing was soft, his eyes half closed. But when Nolan knelt beside him, Trail lifted his head. Then he stood, slowly, shakily, and walked to the edge of the path. Nolan and Lila followed. They walked for nearly an hour, through tall grass and falling leaves, to a small clearing Nolan had never visited. In the middle of it stood a stone marker. Moss covered most of it, but the outline of a paw print was still visible on its surface. Trail circled once, then lay down beside it. Nolan knelt next to him. "You've come home," he said. Trail closed his eyes, and this time he didn't open them. The silence that followed was heavy. Lila placed her hand on Nolan's shoulder. "We'll remember him," she said softly. They buried Trail beneath the marker using an old spade from the clinic shed. Nolan placed the collar on the stone and sat beside it until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long. When they returned to town, word had spread. People came one by one, some with candles, some with flowers, some with tears in their eyes and stories in their hands. A young girl brought a marble and left it on the steps. An elderly man placed a photograph of his brother missing since 1966. No one asked questions. They didn't have to. Trail had led them back to pieces of themselves. 2 mornings later, Nolan opened the front door and froze. There on the mat was a new pebble, smooth, white, and freshly placed, and across the yard, sitting near the fence, was a puppy, small, speckled like Trail, ears perked, eyes wide and curious. In his mouth he held another pebble. Nolan crouched and smiled, tears brimming. "Looks like someone's ready to start again." The wind rustled gently through the trees as the puppy dropped the stone and wagged his tail. And just like that, a new trail began.